Hello all. This is episode 2 in the Pickwick Papers Project, which is, if a quick recap, which actually works very well in the sense of these videos, because every chapter has a quick little header that tells you essentially what happened. Anyway, I'm reading the Pickwick Papers broken up into the sections that were monthly installments when this was originally published in like 1830 something. So, I believe in the first video in the description there's a breakdown of how this is going to work. As far as installment 1 is chapters 1 and 2. This would be installment 2, which covers chapters 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to try to do one of these every 2 weeks as opposed to one a month, because if I did one a month, I think there's like 20 installments. So that'd be a really long time commitment. Somehow, I feel it's still going to be a really long time commitment, but I feel like if I did one a week, once I get into the heart of my semester, I might not be able to keep up with that pace, and I'd rather be consistent than... And I think I really want to get what it was like to read this as you would read it as it was coming out. And if I read one a week, then it's too close because it would be once a month originally. So anyway, I'm going to stop talking because I discussed that in the first video. So this episode is chapters 3, 4, and 5. In chapter 3, essentially what happens is that the Pickwick Club, let's see if I can remember, we're kicking it, and they are talking to this guy. He's an acquaintance. They have a drink. He tells this whole story about this guy who is kind of like a low-level actor who he'd run into, and is kind of a goofy dude, and then ends up like getting really sick all of a sudden. I didn't really get the point. It was an interesting story. And then, as he ends the story, it starts to tell you that like Mr. Pickwick himself was going to have a response, but is interrupted by the presence of the doctor, the military doctor, and the, I think he's a colonel, captain something. Anyway, it's the dudes who wanted to duel Mr. Winkle, I think? They wanted to duel earlier, and you have to go see the first episode for that. And then they realized that they're wanting to duel the wrong guy, so they called it off. So they show up because they were like, oh, when they realized it was the wrong guy, they're like, oh, well, I'm sorry, I apologize. And the guy's like, oh, no worries. We can be buds, because he was scared the whole time. And he didn't remember why they wanted to duel him. He thought he was just drunk when he did whatever they said he did. But he really didn't do it. It was someone else wearing his jacket. So it's really funny, actually. So they're like, oh, come have breakfast with us. So now the Pickwick Club's having breakfast. It's the next day. Doctor shows up with his military homies, ready to have breakfast. And then, of course, the guy who actually insulted the doctor, who should have dueled the doctor and was wearing the Pickwick member's jacket, is there. But the only one who remembers that incident is the other Pickwick guy who wasn't a part of the duel, who was with the... I don't know his name, but he's the guy who was wearing the jacket. I really need to get better at their names. They're all weird. Mr. Snodgrass, Mr. Pickwick, Mr. Winkle, Mr. Tupman. Let me see. I'm going to double check real quick. Okay, Lieutenant Tableton, Dr. Payne, those are the military guys. Dr. Slammer, I think, is the guy who actually was insulted. So Mr. Winkle is the one who they mistakenly wanted to duel. And who is it? Mr. Tupman is the member of the Pickwick Club who went with this skinny newcomer to a ball and was the one that got into it with the doctor. So anyway, doctor and military homies show up. I'm like, oh, we're going to have breakfast. And they go, wait, hey, that's that bastard who insulted me. What the heck? And then Pickwick's like, I don't know what you're talking about. No one in my club was out. No one did anything. We wouldn't do that. And the doctor's like, no, he's not a part of your club. And you go, no, that guy's not a part of our club. And then the doctor goes, well, what about this guy, to Mr. Tupman? And he goes, you know me. And Mr. Tupman's like, oh, yeah. And he has to explain what happened. And then Pickwick's like, oh, God, like, embarrassed. But then the doctor gets really offended, and they leave. Him and his military guys just leave, insulted again. It'll probably come up again later. So then we move to Chapter 4, which is a field day in Biovac, more new friends, and an invitation to the country. So they're having like a military review. So all the townspeople, including the Pickwick Club, go out, and they're going to watch as like the military guys, the troops, come out with their weapons. They do like a little mock battle to show off, and they're good. So the Pickwick Club's there, and it's really funny description of how they want to be up front. They're trying to be noble, and they're talking about how noble and how great this is. Well, they're getting stomped on and pushed and jostled. And then they end up getting in the middle of everything somehow. And they have the armies firing blanks all around them. And they're convinced that, like, there might be a real bullet or two in there by accident. And so they try to run, and they describe Mr. Pickwick being rotund enough that he doesn't really ever run. He just moves at a faster pace. And then they get out of there, and they're all dirty and scuffy. And they end up running into somebody who had visited them in their clubhouse a while back, and he invites them up onto their carriage, where he has his sister-in-law and then a couple of his daughters, I think. And there's a little kid who's like in charge, like a servant guy who's in charge of the food. He's always asleep, and they have to keep the whole time this guy's talking, and he's like, yeah, man, come sit down, hang out. And a couple of members of the Pickwick Club are trying to put the moves on the ladies, and the aunt's a little older, and she's like, oh, no one's paying attention to me, like I'm throwing a little shade at the girls, and the girls are like, hey man, like, you're old. Throwing some shade back at her, and she feels bad. The dad's oblivious, he doesn't care, he's like, whatever, let's eat, like, let's get some food. He has to keep every couple of minutes, he's like, hey Joe, wake up, like, get this. And the only thing that the kid stays awake for is when he has to hand out the food, he gets like really excited. And they have to like remind him not to eat it before he gives it to them. So this whole thing happens, that guy invites them out to his country house, and that's pretty much Chapter 4. Chapter 5 is them attempting to get to the country house, where they say, like, oh, like, they're at their inn or whatever, and they say, let's get something arranged to go out there, and the innkeeper guy goes, okay, we got it. You'll have to, take the carriage. And they're like, okay, then we'll take the carriage. And he says, okay, cool. Except that the carriage fits 2 people inside, and 1 person on top, and there's 4 of you. And they're like, okay, well, one of us will just ride a horse. And I forget who, Mr. Winkle, they go, hey, you'd be good, right? And he doesn't really know how to ride a horse. He's not very good, but he's like, I can't admit that. So he just goes, yes, of course, I would enjoy that very much. So the guy gets it all ready. He pulls up the horse, he pulls up the carriage, and they're all ready to go. They have all their stuff. They get in, and then Mr. Pickwick goes, well, who's going to drive? And the guy's like, you are. Like, you said you would. You're going to get up there and you're going to drive. And they ask the guy, oh, the horse is very well behaved. And the guy goes, oh, yeah, of course. And immediately the horse starts to do something weird. So he's like, oh, that's just him messing with you. He's very playful. So then they start going. And the way they describe it is that the carriage is going. And then Mr. Winkle's horse is not going straight. He's going sideways. And like they're like, the guys in the carriage are talking to him as they're going along. And they're like, why is he going sideways? And he's like, I don't know. And then Mr. Pickwick drops his whip. So Mr. Winkle has to hop down off the horse to get the whip for him, and as he does so, the horse, when he goes to get back on it, he hands the whip to Mr. Pickwick. He goes to get back on his horse. The horse just keeps moving away from him every time he goes to remount, and he's like, I don't know what to do. So they stand there waiting for him. Then Mr. Pickwick's like, fine, I'll help you, and he throws the reins down, hops down off with the whip in his hand. The horse sees the whip, doesn't want to get whipped, so he keeps running away, and the whole time Mr. Winkle has like the leader or reins in his hand, so he's getting pulled, and the faster Mr. Pickwick runs towards the horse, the faster the horse runs away from him, and the harder he pulls Mr. Winkle, and eventually the reins, he gets popped off, and the horse just goes running away, and then they're like stuck, and they're like, oh, what are we going to do? And then they look back, and the horse attached to the carriage, when it realized that no one was holding it, it's like, all right, F that, and just took off. And then as he's going, the two guys in the carriage jump out into like some bushes, and the horse breaks the carriage open against like a bridge or something. And this book is hilarious. Like, it's really, really funny. It's such ridiculous shit. Sorry for the cursing. It is really funny. So I feel like this would be like a good book club book because you can all laugh, but also feel smart. Like, oh, we read the Pickwick Papers by Charles Dickens, but it's hilarious. Anyway, I'm gonna stop talking. This is a long enough video. I apologize for the length. I'll try to keep them shorter. As always, good reading, and thank you for being a part of the Pickwick Papers Project.